If you've got some electrical background, you are as good as gold nowadays in the heavy duty industry. The amount of master techs that can do anything out there, it's very, very low. Guys that can literally do anything. And right now, you can pretty much almost name your price, and the shop's probably going to pay it.
Minutes feels like hours feels like days, and you're just kind of helpless, right? And so you're the lifeline.
If you're thinking about a career in the trades, and you want to know what employers actually look for, what the work is really like, and what nobody tells you before you get started, you're in the right place. Built in the Midwest features conversations that'll help you figure out if this path is for you.
Well, good morning.
Morning.
And I'd like to welcome AJ from 10-4 Truck and Trailer onto the show today.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here, AJ. And I will tell you, I've gotten the pleasure of being able to work with you quite a bit over the last several years.
Yep.
And it's been an absolute joy. And what this program is all about is about exploring different trades and different careers. And somebody that is a diesel tech, why don't you just kick it off and let's start there. I want to know more about diesel tech and how you got into this career.
So there's a lot to it. I mean, a diesel tech can be anywhere from somebody that changes a brake chamber to literally, that rebuilds a motor. There's so much into it, and there's so many different levels of it that you don't have to jump right in it and get into a motor. I mean, you could literally airlines, brake chambers, tires. These new trucks got brake pads and versus the kind of semi-complicated drum systems and there's a lot.
A lot different than just your standard S-cam drum.
Yeah,
has been around forever.
20 years ago, I mean, pretty much every truck had a 4707 brake drum or brake shoe, and
that was it.
Yep.
Type 3030 brake chamber, and that's
Exactly.
what you had. So talk about that, because I will tell you, all my experience on the road was with S-cam drum.
Yep.
Are you seeing a lot more trucks and trailers out there with disc brakes?
Yeah, a ton. You almost gotta. I don't know if you can even get drums anymore. You probably could, but I'm sure it'd be more of a special order thing. And don't get me wrong, the disc brakes, they perform so much better. I mean, it's crazy. Yeah. The rotors last pretty much the life of like a regular drum would, and the pads are about double the shoe, but they're really easy to change.
Wow.
The shoes are easy to change. When you get into the drums or the rotors and calipers, it's a little more interesting. But
I'll be darned. So talk to me about that. As far as, would you say a massive percentage of the truck industry is going to air brake discs, and are we going to see a time where S-cam drum just doesn't exist anymore?
At some point, yeah, I'm sure of it, because the stopping distances are so much better. My dad actually has disc brakes on his newest truck, and he said it's phenomenal, the response and how good they work.
Really, just almost night and day.
Yep.
And that's what they're going to look at when it comes to safety. And I mean, typically speaking, you have about double the stopping distance as a passenger car.
Yep.
So if you can shorten that significantly.
Yeah. And that almost creates a problem, because if you've got a truck behind you with drum brakes and you have a panic stop situation, the truck behind you is not going to stop near as fast as you. So it almost, the two differences almost pose a little bit of a problem, but
almost makes it more dangerous at that point.
In a sense,
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I had a buddy that had a BMW, and he loved the BMW, but you know his favorite thing about the BMW was its ability to brake. And he said it braked significantly quicker than any other vehicle and kept it under control.
Yep.
And so it's one of those things that when you have a emergency type situation where you need to come to a stop, now, it's like your brakes are the most important thing.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's fun to accelerate quickly, but the brakes, all right, that is what I want the most control of.
Especially on a tractor trailer.
Absolutely. Yep. So that's great to know, and it's really interesting, because like I said, all my time on the road, that's all we had was S-cam drum. Yep. So to think in the last, what would you say, 10 years or so?
Probably about that, yeah.
The last 10 years, there's been this massive shift.
And I don't know if you can get like I said, get a new truck with drum brakes. I'm sure if you probably ordered it that way, you could, but that's pretty much everything I see on, say, like a 2022-ish and up. I don't know if I've seen drum brakes,
No, it's becoming standard now.
Yep.
The air brake disc brakes are kind of the new standard.
Yeah, we have a 2022 log truck we work on that's actually disc brake too.
That's all disc brakes as well.
Yep.
Now, from a maintenance perspective, how did you? Because that wasn't around 15 years ago. So how did you learn about all this?
Yeah, a lot of it is it's pretty much set up almost like a car in a sense.
Okay.
I mean but it's a lot heavier duty. Technology obviously. But it's just it's just learning. And it's kind of crazy to think, but I mean, you watch videos of people that teach things and but it's
Absolutely. Once you have a foundation, then it's about, you can kind of start to figure stuff out.
And it's basic mechanics, in
Yep.
a sense. You need some specialty tools when you're working on the calipers and stuff. But
Yeah, absolutely. Something that you touched on there a little bit, which I want to dive a little bit more into, is some diesel techs are like service technicians where they're doing lights and tires and drive shafts and oil changes. And then there's more maybe heavy duty or in-depth. Talk about kind of those differences.
yeah, so and you can have two different guys that do the different things. But I mean the service guys are DOT inspections and doing wheel seals and oil changes and
that's a busy job too, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff like that.
Honestly, that's probably more of the busy type thing
It is.
because there's so much basic stuff that goes wrong in a truck. They don't make them like they used to.
Yeah.
We've had more recently some 2023, 2024 trucks that have had wiring issues where corrosion's getting in the harness on a truck that's only a couple years old. It's just.
Wow.
If you've got some electrical background, you are as good as gold nowadays in the heavy duty industry.
Really?
Yeah,
Really? Just because of all the electrical and technology.
and sensors and it's crazy,
Yeah, absolutely. So how does a guy, and I'm thinking about somebody in high school, and we do presentations with ISDs and different things, and I get asked that question once in a while. All right, how can I become a diesel technician? Now, is there a few different roads, and what would you recommend?
The first thing is you got to have some sort of kind of common knowledge of it. That'd be a really hard thing to teach from scratch if you don't have any sort of mechanical-ish background, whether it be, watching dad or grandpa or, because I've seen it come from both ways, the taught and then the kind of natural, but yet, going through the motions of the schooling and that. And you definitely, if you got some background in it, it really helps.
So being able to wanting to tinker and say someone was in high school and they're working on their pickup truck and they're working with their dad, changing brakes and oil changes and rotate the tires, whatever,
And not be afraid of taking something apart and figuring out how to put it back together. And that's big in this world because there's a lot to that, and you're going to be working on stuff that you've never worked on before. If you're in a industry like we are, to where you're pretty much anybody is going to stop by if they got a problem. When you're on the commercial side of things with like trucking companies and that, where they got the same 100 same trucks and trailers, but it's definitely interesting when.
So that's probably a lot easier. Because you're dealing with probably the same problems 100 times.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, because I have seen like you see some of these diesel tech programs that are maybe Cummins specific or Cat specific. What does that mean?
That's pretty much they're teaching you on their specific motors and driveline.
But nobody else's per se. Okay.
Nobody else. Nope. And they might be teaching you a lot of things that may be beneficial to some other stuff, because like a lot of the engines are, they got a lot of the same stuff going on, but they're teaching specific them related things, as far as taking apart, putting back together.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because I can kind of relate this to the CDL side of things a little bit, where some people say, well, I've never, what's a clutch? Questions like that. I'm like, have you ever driven a four-wheeler or a dirt bike with a stick? A clutch is a clutch, right? It engages and disengages. It's like, there was a student here recently that didn't know what the left and right outside mirrors were for. And so he's like, well, where's the rearview mirror? And I'm like, there is no rearview mirror in a semi-truck. We got our left and right outside mirrors. Those are the ones we got to focus on. But yeah, and maybe that's a lesson here. It's just being more inquisitive to what's going on and be willing to take stuff apart, put it back together, kind of try new things. Right.
And don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's huge. So from your perspective, you take someone out of high school, if someone's inquisitive, they're working on their own truck and everything else, would you say getting right into a shop and working with maybe some senior techs is a great way to gain that experience?
It is. As long as you're willing to learn and pay attention. That's the big thing, because you can learn a lot from a guy that's been doing it for 20, 30, or even more years.
Absolutely.
That's big.
Someone that's been in the trade, working on this stuff, and your trade. I love your trade because your trade feeds so many trades. When you think about it, like who's behind the scenes making sure that heavy equipment is running properly and maintained, all the trucks, the trailers, all the lineman stuff, right? The digger derricks, those are diesel techs that are behind the scenes. You're really the unsung heroes.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think about it?
We try to keep everybody working.
You keep everybody moving. Like every log truck, I see log trucks in and out of your facility there all the time. And it's one of those things that everyone sees the log trucks, but they don't know behind the scenes who maintains them, who makes sure that they're up to par.
And there's so many moving parts to those things too. They got the hydraulics that load. The drivetrain's like any other truck, but it's like twice as heavy duty. Just massive motors in them, and they definitely, and unfortunately,
they're heavy hauling, so it seems like they're breaking stuff all the time.
They're bouncing in and out of the woods. They're driving on roads I wouldn't want to drive my pickup down, and they're doing it with 160,000 pounds gross. Oh. So there's a lot of when it comes to them.
And I give all log truck drivers a lot of credit because it's something I've just gone out with some friends before, and I'm like, and like you said, they take these fully loaded log trucks and trailers down trails. I might take a four-wheeler down, and I'm like, the massive potholes. They're rubbing the pumpkins in the back, and I'm like, what the heck? You got trees slapping the side of the truck. Like, well, we got to trim them somehow.
Yeah, and those log truck drivers, they don't call road service when something breaks.
No,
they figure it out themselves. Like these over-the-road drivers, they'll just pick up the phone. Oh, I'm broke down. Come fix it. With these log truck drivers, they'll get out. They'll figure out what's broke. They'll figure out a way to make it to where they can get it out of the woods at least. And
exactly.
Log truck drivers are definitely.
So you actually see that. You see that where your log truck drivers that are stuck 30 miles in the middle of the woods. Yep. It's like no, they got to figure it out, and they got to clamp stuff together or pinch stuff off or just to be able to get it out of the woods to get it to a shop. But they're gonna keep moving.
Yep, they figure out a way to make it happen. They're truly, it's crazy some of the stuff they can do.
And some of those guys are almost diesel techs, to an extent with what they're given. Essentially, they're like who's that? MacGruber? MacGyver, yeah. And like chicken wire and duct tape, and they're able to make it work and get themselves out of the woods. Yeah, but
they'll carry extra hydraulic hoses and fluids, and it's pretty crazy.
It is. Yeah. It is, and what they're able to do right in the middle of the woods there. But and that's kind of interesting because for somebody that's interested in getting into, say even an owner-operator type position or a log truck type position, it's like, they should know that some of that light maintenance, that's going to be your responsibility. And those smaller companies, and correct me if I'm wrong, aren't going to tolerate you. Oh, I got a blown brake chamber. You know what I mean? Would you come on out and fix it? It's like, no, they're going to expect you to cage it and pinch off that line. Am I right on that?
Yeah. If you're an owner operator, for sure, you've got to do that kind of stuff yourself. Nowadays with freight rates and fuel prices, you can't afford to take every single repair or breakdown to a shop.
No.
You've got to try to do at least the basic stuff yourself.
You got to try. You got to try. And even when you're talking about, I'm thinking like pigtails, or having to replace a pigtail, or replace lights or headlights, or there's or glad hand seals, or even glad hands to an extent. It's like there's so many stuff. So maybe you could talk about that on to save some drivers out there maybe some money, or some companies. What advice would you give them on the maintenance side of things?
You should absolutely have just a basic set of airline fittings with you, because if you have an airline rub on a frame or anywhere, you can cut out the bad part, put a union in, just to get yourself to somewhere where you can have it done correctly, or have fluids with you. We've been called out different times where driver had a small leak and needs some coolant. Have fluids with you, have basic tools with you.
I think I'm going to start writing this stuff down. All right, this is important stuff.
Have
it really
basic
is.
Tools with you, and just kind of have the ability to kind of self-help yourself if you end up in not a crazy situation. What's also a guy don't think of is having one of them airlines that connect to your glad hands to put air in a tire.
I always carried one with me as well. Yeah, those are slick.
And you don't see a lot of over-the-road guys like that anymore.
No.
Of course, a lot of the company drivers, they don't think they get paid enough to deal with anything like that. But when it comes down to it, it's your time, and if you can get yourself off the side of the road or to somewhere,
that could be huge.
Time is money to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to wait 4 or 5 hours for a service truck, or can you get yourself going?
Get some air in it, and
that makes a huge difference. I remember, and maybe I wouldn't recommend people doing this, but taking a truck a very long distance with no clutch, and starting it in gear, because guess what? It saved the company thousands of dollars.
Correct.
To do it back home as opposed to on the road. But I think more people should have that kind of mindset, because and don't look at it like you're just saving the company money, but look at it like you're saving yourself a lot of time too.
Exactly.
Like that's important.
Yeah, and because time is money in this industry, because you got a clock on your dash, it's just ticking away, and it doesn't care if you're broke down or not.
And you don't get paid if you're sitting. You know what I mean? That's the trucking industry is pretty much across the board. You only get paid if those wheels are turning. Exactly. So it's in your best favor to keep those wheels turning. Yep. So with that being said, what would you say are the and I'm looking at across the country, the top 5 breakdowns for and we'll focus on tractor trailers and stuff that you see, or would you say?
The main one we deal with is blown brake chambers.
Okay.
That's probably one of the more common ones nowadays.
We see that often too. Yeah.
Yep. And that's something I will say with the disc brakes. Their chambers do last a little longer.
Is it a different chamber as well?
It's definitely different. It's a different style.
Okay.
The same kind of concept, but it's a different.
They seem to last a little bit longer though.
A lot more expensive, of course.
Of course.
And then there's so many emissions related problems nowadays. It's just absolutely crazy. Anywhere from just sensors being bad to DEF freezing up because the heater quit, or some trucks just not meeting the right parameters to regen themselves, and you need to plug a computer into them and then it
derates it down to nothing.
But it's so computerized nowadays that you can have a truck that just needs the regen, but it's in the middle of winter and the exhaust needs to hit a certain temperature, and
it's not going to.
No. There's been some situations to where you gotta figure out what's ailing it, and there's been one that it needed like 30 more degrees of the exhaust temp before it would kick in, and and surprising enough, turning the engine fan gave enough load on the engine to heat up the exhaust just that much more, and then bam, it snap of a finger, it was like, oh, all right, we're good to go. But when it's 10 below zero, that exhaust is hanging down in the frigid temperatures, and
It's not heating up anytime
winter-
quick. Yeah.
winter is hard on everything.
Yeah.
Especially emission systems.
Wow, that's I talked to a lot of companies, and a lot of them have mentioned that as well, that these emission systems account for like a massive percentage of their breakdowns and of their maintenance. And I know it drives drivers crazy as well on the road, because when you're derated down to 5 miles an hour, and talk about why do they do that?
They do that so you don't just keep driving it, because they'll keep going. It's just you're gonna damage your filter system if you drive it plugged, but all that derate is just to make you pay attention to what's wrong and make you do something about it. I mean, some of the newer stuff is getting smart enough to where you can't just clear the code and drive it a little bit more. It wants to see that you fixed the problem, and the probably I'd say 5-6 years ago, if a guy could just clear the codes and that'll be enough to get me home. Well, you really can't do that anymore, because these trucks are smart enough to know you didn't fix anything.
Well, yeah. So and then it would take a little while for that code to show back up, but at least it would keep you going.
It might buy you a couple hundred more miles.
Yeah. Do you think they're getting better with these systems?
I do. Especially on. We work a lot on the Mack Volvo, and that they have definitely gotten a little better. It's sure taken long enough, considering they started doing this stuff back in 2012 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
It's been a long time.
Yeah.
It's only taken 15 years later we're starting to figure this stuff out.
Yep.
Thank God some of these trucks get 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million miles on an engine and a transmission. So it allows. There's other things that they've really perfected. I'm thinking like the DD15, like the Detroit Series 60, and some of those motors just you couldn't kill them.
Yeah, if you let them warm up, let them cool down, and change oil like you're supposed to, you never had anything to worry about.
No, it's amazing. And one thing I've always wanted to ask a diesel tech this question. All right, why is it? A gasoline engine, you're going to get 200,000 to 300,000 miles maximum, typically speaking, right?
Yep.
And there's a lot of trucks on the road right now with over 1 million miles, same engine, same transmission, hauling the heaviest stuff out there. Well, how's that possible?
Everything's turning slower. Those gas motors, you're thousands of RPMs, where these big truck motors, man, you're just cooking along. 1,400, 1,500 RPMs, everything's turning slower, but they build them that to last too. If they built car motors to last that long, man, nobody'd ever want to, buy cars. But I will say that a lot of the newer gas motors are, 100,000 miles is nothing anymore.
No. So you have seen them and kind of increase that number.
And with the amount of emissions issues nowadays, I've seen a lot of medium duty applications don't even bother with diesels anymore in some of the like school bus type situations. So the gas motors are, I don't want to say making a comeback, but I mean they're a lot simpler, A
lot simpler, and those from a maintenance perspective, are they easier to maintenance? You said they don't have emissions on the gas stuff?
Not that I've seen.
Okay.
They've always had catalytic converters on it, but they don't have DEF and all that. Oil changes are cheaper, but you're not going to see 1 million miles out of one. You're not going to see fuel mileage out of a gas motor by a long shot, So the diesels are way more efficient, and if you're in a long-term standpoint, they're the only way to go.
They're more efficient. You can get that higher mileage, right? Yep. But clearly the gasolines are getting better. But it seems like you look at I'm thinking airplanes to an extent, but your boats, your ships, your big cargo ships, all your tractor trailers, your heavy equipment. There's got to be something to diesel, right? Because almost everything out there, everything big like that is diesel.
And it's just efficiency.
Yeah.
Efficiency and longevity. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it's really, really interesting, and something talking about like the heavy equipment side things too. Those are, correct me if I'm wrong, but whether it's your logging, your processors and your forwarders, or your backhoes or your mine trucks, all those are diesel too, right?
Everything like that. Yep.
Everything like that, right? So who maintenances all that stuff on the heavy equipment side?
It's a diesel tech.
It's a diesel tech.
Yep. Yeah. It's whether it's a small little generator up to the big logging trucks and heavy equipment. I mean, they're still diesel powered, and it's crazy to think that they've all got fuel injectors and turbochargers, and it's just they start amplifying the size up bigger and bigger.
They just make everything bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it can handle so much more.
Yep.
Well, you just see what some of these. I think like the huff at the mill.
Oh my goodness.
Can do. I mean, like it'll pick up a small house or a big house.
Yeah.
I mean,
I've watched them pick up a fully loaded semi trailer that sunk in the mud. They literally just go over there. They put a strap around it. And fix it right up like it's nothing.
Like it's nothing.
Yep. It's got 40,000 pounds of paper in the trailer, and it's like
no problem. Like
it don't even know it's there.
Which there's not many tow companies around that could pull that out of the ditch, and not struggle heavily. Almost every big tow out like that I've seen, they always have to empty the trailer because it's just too much weight to pull out.
And a lot of it, they don't. If they unload the trailer, they're doing less damage to the trailer too.
Sure, yeah.
It's all in damage control in that business. Because you don't ever want to create more damage.
Create more damage.
There already are. Insurance companies.
At some point, if you're rolled over, I mean.
unless you're in the middle of 94 in Chicago, they're going to try to probably be careful. Yeah,
they're going to be careful. They're going to want to salvage as much as they can, and the load perhaps as well.
Exactly. So. We last week we had a situation where a place called us that they had a trailer that had ended up going in the ditch from the snowstorm, and their main concern was the contents of the trailer. They needed to get it inside a warm shop so the contents didn't freeze. And get the trailer legal to haul down the road, and that was their main concern because the contents could be 3 times the value of the truck sometimes in the trailer.
So what did they tell you what they were hauling?
It was non-hazardous. That's all I cared about.
Non-hazardous. Okay, but something expensive in that trailer, but it could not freeze.
It could not freeze.
No. So it had to go into a shop somewhere. Yep. Otherwise, so yeah, that's an interesting point as well. You see some of these really high dollar loads. There's a student that I communicate with once in a while, and he's hauling out of like Arizona, but he's hauling not lithium ion. It's like cobalt ion, I believe.
Okay.
Tesla batteries.
Oh.
But these are like millions and millions of dollar loads. So at that point, they don't care about the truck and the trailer. Like if something were to happen, they care about that cargo.
Correct.
Right? And there's all these different things. Like they got to scan the back doors, and they got a metal seal and a lock on the back. I mean, you can imagine what kind of security is involved with stuff like that. But so did that load ended up being fine and everything?
Yep. Yeah. We put it inside the shop. It sat overnight.
Just help everybody.
Did a couple things to the trailer to make it to where it was DOT legal, and they went and delivered it, and life went on.
Yeah, no, nothing wrong with that. You just help everybody. That's so.
We try.
Well, and we certainly appreciate it.
And you got to have the guys behind you to put in the work when it comes to people calling and having problems. If you don't have a guy in the shop that can do it or has the time to do it, it makes it tough. So and thankfully, we've got 4 guys that are full time, and you can get a lot of stuff done with 4 guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having a great crew and a great team, but what you do helps not just the local community, and that's something I wouldn't mind having you share is like you don't work on just the local community trucks. I see trucks from all over in your shop. Talk about that. I mean, some of these guys are from California.
That's what we try to do is we try to save a few hours throughout the day for the guys that are passing through and having problems, and
because that's a part of trucking, right? Those things are going to happen.
That was an avenue in this area that we knew there was nobody that could help. So and it's unfortunate because there are times we don't have the time, and it's like they say, well, where would you recommend? And it's like, unfortunately, everybody around here, is booked up days and weeks in advance, which is great for them. It's nice to be busy,
but there's a massive void there too.
Correct. Yeah. If we can't do it, they've got you send somebody up from like the Green Bay area, or they got to get a hold of Gene's Towing and say, hey, I need to get brought here or there, because unfortunately around here there's just, there's just not much around here. We're kind of up in the middle.
No,
of nowhere.
yeah, we are in the middle of nowhere, pretty much. That not quite to the point where we're hearing the banjos, all right? But maybe if you go more towards Stonington or Neymar. Give my friends a shout out over that neck of the woods.
But it's like I said, it's nice to have a crew of good guys that so when the phone rings, you can help as many people as you can, and it's obviously it's a for-profit business. So I mean, you say you're helping, but at the same time, it's still a business. But
it's a win-win, and at the end of the day, that's what this world is. It's about a win-win. You know what I mean? Because some of these guys, I've been broken down in the middle of the country before, and I'll tell you, it's the absolute worst feeling in the world. Yep. And when I'm dealing with the dispatcher and the maintenance manager, and they're like, well, let me look on NTTS breakdown, and they're doing this, and I'm like, and you're just sitting there. I'll tell you, it feels like minutes feels like hours feels like days, and you're just kind of helpless, right? And so you're the lifeline.
Yeah, and you got to prioritize too. If you're real busy, and it's something that really doesn't require a service call, and the driver's just kind of being picky. If you're super busy, you can kind of just let those ones go. But then there's some to where, your phone might ring at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and it's, hey, my driver's truck died. He's in Marquette. It's 0 degrees outside. I got to figure out something because he's getting cold, and those type of things you just gotta figure it out. And of course those are when it's a blizzard out, and
of course, Murphy's Law. Just,
so that's when you got to
something bad's going on. Well, something even worse is going to happen.
So you got to prioritize, and those are the ones where if you got a life on that other end, that you got to try to figure things out, and it's in prioritizing, and we try to do that the best we can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's just I really appreciate what you do. Not just for the school, but just for the community in general, and have somebody to go to that does such a great job. It takes pride in their work, and I just it's one of those things that you really are kind of the backbone of all these industries.
Yeah,
and you are the unsung heroes. That you really are, and everyone sees the trucks going down the road. They see the big huffs at the mill, and they see the log trucks hauling 160,000 pounds of wood. They see homes being built. But who's maintaining all those trucks and trailers and heavy equipment? There's a diesel tech behind the scenes that's making that happen. So any other thoughts or words that you'd like to share with aspiring diesel techs out there? Yeah.
So pretty much if you enjoy mechanics, you will always have a job somewhere. It doesn't necessarily have to be rebuilding motors and stuff. It's just if you have the passion and the desire to do a job and do it right, you're always going to have a job, and you pretty much, the sky's the limit as far as what you can learn and do. The amount of master techs that can do anything out there, it's very, very low. Guys that can literally do anything. And right now, you could pretty much almost name your price, and the shop's probably going to pay it because, you're a very, very low percentage of techs out there. And even like the start of the entry level type, the main thing you got to do is just take your time. Don't be afraid to ask questions and learn and pay attention, because if you start running up the ranks, I mean, the sky's the limit in that industry.
Absolutely. So, one other kind of follow-up question to that, and would you say, like, I've been in the truck industry for going on 20 years, and I learn new stuff every day. And would you say that's the same in your trade as well?
Yes. When it comes to, especially on our side where you see any type of different vehicle there is, when it comes to, heavy equipment to tractor trailers to, bucket trucks. And I mean, it's, you can definitely learn something new every day, because there's multiple different types. Even if it is an over-the-road truck, well, there's 4, 5, 6 different kinds, and they could have the same truck but different motors. And I mean, it's definitely you never know what's going to walk in the door or call you, and
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's important, that, you know what, you're never, take one course and you're done learning, or work under some guy for 6 months and you're done learning. It's like, no, this is a continual process. And and I really believe in my life, the more I've learned about anything, the more I've realized how little I know. Like I almost get scared of learning more, because the more I learn, the more like my knowledge goes down, the more I learn, because you realize how little you really know. But it's one of those things, is being able to continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to progress. But I really appreciate your kind of insight on all this, AJ. I appreciate you being on the show. I'll give you the last word, my friend.
And unfortunately, they don't make things easy to work on nowadays. So
No.
you're going to struggle sometimes, and with things are unfortunately made cheaper nowadays. So you're never not gonna have something to do.
Absolutely. They're not building stuff to last anymore.
No.
This plant, I got a couple of friends that are engineers, and they straight up told me like that's the plant obsolescence, right, is a thing. Engineers, if they knew they could make that part, say 1 inch, and it would last 1,000,000 miles, no, they'll make it a 1/4 inch to last 100,000 miles right after the warranty ends.
And they'll make it out of plastic.
Knowing that the hot, cold, it's no different. You leave this water bottle in the ditch for a year. Now, don't do that. All right, I like to pick up garbage every year. Leave a ditch for a year. Well, it'll start weather tracking, cracking, and it'll eventually bust into 1,000,000 pieces. Right, and then you have microplastics all over the place. But the same thing on all this plastic parts on your vehicle.
Yeah, it's crazy what they don't make out of metal anymore. But I know they do it for weight savings and cost, and but it just boils down to that plastic does not last forever, and the heat of the coolant and the heat of the oil, it's not a good thing. But I mean, if it's good job security for us,
it's good job security. So well, and at the end of the day, as long as there's people like yourself that are willing to kind of get down and dirty, all right. I would say a lot of these trades are dirty jobs. You can say if I was Mike Rowe up here talking,
and it's not they're not. It's not always fun. You're not always going to have good days, but when it gets down to it, it's a very it's a job that it's very required, and
absolutely.
And I've seen more in the last probably 5 years that there's a real need for it, more than there's ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real need out there, and it's I think it's great to put out there that this is a viable career option for people that are thinking about it. You know what I mean? And look at you going from a full-time diesel tech to now manager and managing a location. And so, like the trucking industry, there's different facets that you could get into, or maybe you like to. And I think you see that quite often with diesel techs, where somebody just likes to do heavy equipment, or someone likes to do knuckle boom cranes, or I know some out in Bark River like to do log trucks. That's all. That's what they do. And so you can kind of maybe find your niche there too.
Exactly. And I have guys too that like to work on this, but they can work on anything. You can like this, but if you're if you've got an open mind, and some some want to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can. It's the sky is the limit.
Yeah, that and the YouTube University. I know I do my fair share on there.
That's a legitimate thing.
It is, but that's also that willingness to learn.
Yeah,
right. It's just
you can watch a 5-minute video and it may save you an hour taking something apart.
Oh my God, even like the home projects, in my house, and my wife's always got something new for me. Paint this wall, let's redo this trim. I'm like, I don't know how to make the special cuts with trim, but YouTube does, right?
And then the other thing too is you got to put in the time. It's huge. You got to be the type of person that you got to show up on time, because that piece of equipment that's sitting in your bay that needs to be worked on, there's somebody waiting to operate that, and they may be sitting at home waiting for you to get done with it. but you got to put in the time, and you got to be willing to, if it's going to take an extra 15 minutes to finish at 5 p.m., you got to put in that extra 15 minutes, because a lot of this equipment, may work around the clock too, and the difference between it rolling out the door at 5 o'clock and going to work, it can put in a whole 12 hours before you even get back to work. So it's very important to put in the time.
Exactly. And I think that's like a lot of the trades. This right now is like, you get paid for results, right? You don't get paid just to, tighten some bolts or whatever, diagnosing. No, you get paid for results. Like, this piece of equipment is broken and I want it fixed. Well, guess what? You're working on it until you can fix it, and figure out what's going on with it. That's where that value is for those results.
Yep.
So, well, I'm not going to take up any more of your time, AJ, because I know you are busier, one of the busiest guys I know, to say the least. So I really appreciate you being on the podcast today, and
I appreciate you guys having me, and I appreciate all your guys' business. You keep us nice and busy.
Well, we appreciate you. All right, it's a win-win. So thanks again for being here.